Hello students and welcome to BioBytes. Today's video is going to be about transportation from chapter 6, life processes. So first let's look at what are the fluid connective tissues in our body. The first liquid we're going to discuss is blood, which we previously know is commonly called the fluid connective tissue because it carries various substances around the body. Blood is made up of two components, a liquid component called plasma and a solid component which consists of the blood cells. So plasma is basically a colorless fluid which has food, carbon dioxide and nitrogenous waste which it carries around in dissolved form. And the blood cells consist of the red blood cells, the white blood cells and the platelets. So the red blood cells contain the red iron-rich pigment called hemoglobin, and this is going to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. White blood cells are going to provide a defense against diseases and infection and basically form the immune system in the body. Platelets are going to play a very important role in blood clotting. Basically, if there are any injuries or wounds in our body, it helps trap all the blood cells, coagulate and form a blood clot so that wound healing and a scab formation can happen. So basically, the platelets prevent leaking of excessive blood. The next fluid that we're going to discuss is called lymph or tissue fluid. So this type of fluid is formed when small amounts of fluid, exception of RBC, starts leaking from the very thin blood capillaries and starts to occupy the spaces between the tissues. Hence the name tissue fluid. Now this fluid starts to get collected in vessels called the lymph vessels, from where it will start moving into the lymphatic capillaries, the lymph nodes, and then eventually make its way back to the blood capillaries. So lymph is similar to plasma, but it has less protein when compared to plasma, and it doesn't have any RBC. So lymph contains digested fat from the small intestine, and it's also going to have a large number of WBCs like lymphocytes, phagocytes. So it is going to help the WBCs in immune defense. Next, let's look at the structure of the heart. So the heart is a muscular fist-shaped organ, and it has walls called septum. And these septum prevent oxygenated and deoxygenated blood from mixing together. So the human heart is four-chambered. The upper two chambers are called the atria or the auricles, and the lower two chambers are called the ventricles. So if you notice the structure more closely, the ventricles are thicker than the auricles. This is because the auricles only have to pump blood downwards to the ventricles, but the ventricles have to pump blood to the rest of the body. So it has to withstand high pressure and hence have thick walls. So if you notice the spaces between the auricles and the ventricles and the blood vessels like aorta and the pulmonary artery, they are lined with valves. So valves make sure that the flow of blood is only in one direction, that is the forward direction. It prevents the backflow of blood. So basically blood cannot go back to a chamber which it has just exited. So valves serve as doors which shut and prevent this backflow. Now we're going to look at the entire process of blood circulation. So blood circulation can start from the region of the left auricle. So now oxygenated rich blood is going to come from the lungs. It is going to be carried by the pulmonary veins, and the pulmonary veins is going to empty this blood into the left auricle. So the left auricle is going to relax and fill up with blood. So once it has collected all the blood, it is going to now contract and send the blood to the left ventricle. So the region between the left auricle and left ventricle is connected by the bicuspid or mitral valve. So now the mitral valve is going to prevent the oxygenated blood from escaping from the left ventricle back to the left auricle. So once the left ventricle has filled up on all the oxygenated blood, it will now contract and push the blood into the largest artery in our body, the aorta, via the aortic valve. Now the aorta will carry this oxygenated blood and give it to all the cells and tissues of the body. So once the oxygenated blood has gone to all the cells and tissues and all the organs, it will now exchange the oxygenated blood and give back the deoxygenated blood to the blood vessels. And the two blood vessels that are going to carry this deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart are the superior and inferior vena cava. Now, these two blood vessels will carry the deoxygenated blood and empty it into the right auricle. The right auricle is now going to fill up with deoxygenated blood, then contract and send the deoxygenated blood to the right ventricle via the tricuspid valve. Now, once the right ventricle has completely filled up on the deoxygenated blood, it is going to contract and send the blood to the pulmonary artery via the pulmonic valve. Now, the pulmonary artery will carry the deoxygenated blood back to the lungs where it will wait to get reoxygenated again. So, this completes one cycle of blood circulation. Now, we're going to look at some basic differences and advantages and disadvantages of double and single circulation. So, double circulation is when blood flows through the heart twice, basically from the heart to the body and from the heart to the lungs in a single cycle. Single circulation is when blood flows through the heart only once per cycle. So, the main advantage of double circulation is that it prevents the intermixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood, thereby allowing your body cells to get 100% oxygen. So this means the oxygen efficiency is very high. So there is going to be some amount of intermixing of blood during the single circulation process. So the oxygen efficiency is going to be decreased. So organisms, animals that perform double circulation are going to require high energy, and they are going to use the energy to maintain their body temperature. So these kind of animals are called warm-blooded animals. So when there is external change in temperature, they are able to use up energy to regulate their body temperature. So for example, if the external environment is cold, they are able to burn some energy and generate heat within their body. So most organisms, almost all organisms performing double circulation have a 4-chambered heart. Single circulatory organisms do not have the ability to regulate their own body temperatures because they lack the energy to do so. So they are called cold-blooded animals. So if the external environment is cold, they unfortunately have to mimic the external environment. Their body also becomes cold to match the external environment. They have 3 or 2-chambered hearts. So birds and mammals have 4-chambered hearts and are warm-blooded, whereas amphibian and reptiles are 3-chambered heart. Fishes have 2-chambered hearts, and all these three, the amphibians, reptiles, and fishes, are called cold-blooded animals. Now we're going to look at the concept of blood pressure. So simply put, the force that blood is going to exert on a wall of an artery is called blood pressure. So blood pressure is a combination of two separate pressures, systole and diastole. So the pressure generated by ventricular contraction is called the systolic pressure, and the pressure generated by ventricular relaxation is called the diastolic pressure. So together this makes up a value of 120/80, which is designated as the normal blood pressure. BP is measured through a device called the sphygmomanometer, and a condition where there is high blood pressure, which may be caused due to poor diet, age, and other genetic factors, is called hypertension. So if you suffer from hypertension, you need immediate medical intervention, have to consult a doctor and look about getting the BP fixed through medication or surgery. Otherwise, there might be permanent damage to the artery. Now let's look at the 3 types of blood vessels: the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. So the arteries are the largest blood vessels in the body and they carry blood away from the heart. An exception to this is the pulmonary artery. Veins carry blood towards the heart with the exception of the pulmonary vein, and capillaries carry blood in both directions. Since arteries have to withstand blood which has high pressure, they have thick elastic walls. Veins do not have that much blood pressure, so they have thin walls. And capillaries are extremely small. They are only 1 cell thick. So arteries, like we previously discussed, have blood with high pressure, and veins and capillaries have blood with low pressure. So the lumen is basically the diameter of the blood vessel, how large or how small the diameter is. Since arteries have to maintain a high pressure, it makes sense that their lumen is narrow. Veins have a broad lumen, whereas capillaries, since they are only single cell thick, have the smallest lumen of the three. Arteries and capillaries do not have any valves, but veins possess valves because they have to suck and carry blood from the extremities, basically from the tips of our toes to the tips of our hand back to the heart. So they need the valves to slowly push the blood up in this direction, the direction towards the heart. Lastly, we're going to look at transport in plants. So we all know that the vascular bundle, which composes of the xylem and phloem, is going to carry water and minerals and food respectively. So two cells, basically the tracheids and the xylem vessels in the xylem tissue, are actually going to be conducting the water and mineral ions. The process by which water enters the soil, the root, and goes to the top of the leaf, this entire process is called the ascent of sap. It is going to start with osmosis. So we all know that water travels from a region of high to low concentration, and in this case the soil is going to have the high concentration and the root hair cells are going to have the low concentration. So through this process, water is going to enter the root hair cells, and then the root pressure is going to push the cells from the root to the base of the stem, where it is going to move up through some height through the process of capillary action. So capillary action is nothing but the ability of water to go up, to rise up in a tube. Then the main driving force that pulls up the water from the stem to the leaves to the atmosphere is called transpiration pull. So water is getting lost from the leaf via the stomata through the process of transpiration. We all know this. So this transpiration pull is going to create a force, and water, being both cohesive and adhesive, is now going to rise up through the plant. So cohesion is nothing but the attraction that water molecules have for each other, and adhesion is the ability of water to stick to a surface. So we all know that if we take up water through a straw, it has the ability to rise up and move up. And that is exactly how water moves up through transpiration pull. Translocation, on the other hand, is the movement of soluble products of photosynthesis through the phloem. Basically, the transport of food like sucrose and amino acids from the phloem in the leaf to parts of the plant which require the food. This may be flowers, seeds, roots, fruits, etc. So food moves in both directions. It can move above the plant, it can move below the plant. And since the food, which is sucrose, is a solid product, it cannot move on its own. It requires energy in the form of ATP. So it uses the active transport process. So how sucrose moves is, it uses up some water from the neighboring xylem and moves via this water from a region of high osmotic pressure. Basically, where it is made in the leaves is where it is having the most high pressure. Places of low pressure can be any part of the plant that requires the food. It can be a stem, it can be a seed, it can be a flower, it can be a root. So it will move from the high osmotic pressure to the region of low osmotic pressure via the water. So with that, we have come to the end of the video. Please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe to BioBytes.